first grade class. Today we're going to be reading a story, but before we do, we're going to go over some vocabulary words that we find in this story. And I want you to use these pictures while we're reading to kind of help you remember what the word means. Our first word is enemy. An enemy is one that tries to hurt or seeks the failure of another. So that means it's someone that is not your friend. The opposite of a friend is your enemy, someone you do not get along with at all. Our next word is satisfied. To make happy or meets the needs of someone. You feel fulfilled. So maybe you're really hungry and you go downstairs and you get a bowl of cereal and you feel satisfied after you get something to eat. Confused is another word that we'll hear in our story. Confused is you're mentally foggy or unsure of something. You feel really puzzled. Maybe sometimes when you're in school, you're not sure what's going on. If you're doing a new math problem, you're feeling a bit confused. Panicked is another word that we're going to come across, and it's to become very worried or afraid. If I said today we were having a surprise test, you may feel a little panicked, a little afraid. And our last word in our book that we're going to go over is relieved, to feel freed from worried or stress. So if I said, I'm just kidding, we're not going to have a test today, you may feel, oh, relieved. And in our class, we've been talking about making predictions while we're reading. Making predictions. A prediction is a guess using text or picture clues to help you. So sometimes I make a prediction. I may look out the window. I see that there are very dark clouds in the sky, and I predict that it may rain. So when we're reading a book and we're doing predictions, we use pictures in our texts to make a guess about what's going to happen in our story. So I may say, I predict something because, and you use the clues to help you. So we're going to do predictions before reading. We look at the title in our illustrations. During reading, we stop and we predict what will happen next. And at the very end, after our reading, we can either confirm, yes, our prediction was right, or we adjust. We have to say, nope, my prediction was not right, but this is what really happened. So let's take a look at our book today. We're going to be reading, the book title is Enemy Pie. And I'm looking at the illustration on the front, and I see a little boy holding a pie with, it looks like weeds and worms and dirt in it. Ew. I want you, in a second, to turn and talk to your partner and predict what you think the book will be about today. And don't forget to use these words. I predict something because, and I want you to talk to your partner and give you some think time, what you think this book will be about. You're going to predict. All right, ready? Turn and talk. Great job, guys. I heard a lot of good predictions, so we better go ahead and see what our story is about. Enemy Pie. The author is Derek Munson, and was illustrated by Tara Callahan King. Enemy Pie. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks. And I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in baseball. He had a party on his trampoline, and I wasn't even invited. My best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. Ooh, enemy. Somebody that you just do not get along with. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too. But he knew of a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you? I'll show you, he said. He pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. Enemy pie, he said, satisfied. And remember, our word satisfied means you're happy, you're fulfilled. You may be wondering what exactly is in enemy pie. I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret, he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. I will tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kinds of things, disgusting things, would he put into a pie for an enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think I'd need those. I gave him the gum I'd been chewing all morning. He gave it right back to me. So let's stop and think and look at our pictures here and think about our text. He didn't want to put in the weeds. His dad didn't want to use the earthworms or rocks. I want you to think about it, and you're going to turn and talk to your partner, and I want you guys to predict what you think is going to be in an enemy pie. Ready? Think, turn and talk. All right, good predictions. Let's see what's going to happen. I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me. And all the while, I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. Confused. He's feeling a little unsure. He's feeling a little puzzled. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good. But Dad was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it, he said. I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked plain, like a plain old pie. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out, or their breath stinky. Maybe it made the police cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. There is one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. And remember, an enemy is someone that is not usually your friend at all. You don't get along. It's not easy, but that's the only way that enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross. Then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and I knocked on the door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and he looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. Can you play? I asked. He looked confused. I'll go ask my mom, he said. He came back with his shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. You boys stay out of trouble, she said, smiling. Let's look at our picture. Jeremy looks confused. Someone that isn't his friend came over to ask him to play. I want you to think about a time that you felt confused. Think about what the word confused means. You're going to talk with your partner about what confused means and a time that you might have felt confused. I'm going to give you some time to think about it. Think about what the word means. You're going to talk about what the word confused means with your partner and talk about a time that you have felt confused. Ready? Turn and talk. Good job. We learned that confused means that you are unsure. You're puzzled. You're not sure what to do. So let's see what happens between these two. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighbor girls. But we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch, and after lunch we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice. But of course I couldn't tell Dad that since he had worked so hard to make this enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to him. I threw it and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my tree house. My tree house was my tree house. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And if Jeremy wanted in, let's stop here and think. His enemy is over in his backyard and wants to go up into the playhouse. And we know that there's a sign in there that has Jeremy's name on an enemy list. Let's stop and use these clues to predict. What do you think is going to happen in our story? I want you to turn and talk to your neighbor and predict. I predict what will happen because... Okay, turn and talk. All right, some of you guys thought that Jeremy's not going to let him up into his treehouse. And I heard some of you also say that he would run up and take the sign down. Let's see who's right. Jeremy said, "Can we go in?" I knew he was going to ask me that. But he was the top person, the only person on my enemy list. And enemies aren't allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me to throw a boomerang, and he did have me over for lunch, and he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. Okay, I said, hold on. I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him. And when he came out to get us, we tried to hide from him, but somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner. My favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut the pie into 8 thick slices. Dad, I said, it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood. I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. This is our last prediction. Let's stop and think. What do you think is going to happen next? I'm going to have you talk to your neighbor, and you're going to predict what is going to happen with Jeremy and the pie. Go ahead, turn and talk to your neighbor, and and we'll see what happens. All right, good job, guys. I heard some really good predictions. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. Wow, Jeremy said, looking at the pie. My dad never makes pies like this. It was at the point that I panicked. Oh no, he's becoming very worried and afraid. I didn't want Jeremy to eat enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. Jeremy, don't eat it. It's bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something. Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and he looked funny at me. I felt relieved. I was free from worry and stress. Whew. I had saved his life. I was a hero. If it's so bad, Jeremy asked, then why is your dad already eating half of it? I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful. And that was all he said. I sat there watching them eat enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing, and Jeremy was eating happily. And neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his new bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he would teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or if their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, because I just lost my best enemy. So, we're finished with our story. We made a lot of predictions through it, but our very first prediction was, what do you think this story was going to be about? So we're going to do one last talk with our neighbor. So when we're done with the book, after we're done reading, we confirm, yes, my prediction was right. Or you say, no, I had to adjust what I was thinking. What I thought wasn't right, but this is what I thought happened. So I want you to turn and talk to your neighbor and tell them, yes, your prediction was right, or maybe your prediction wasn't right, but you're going to explain what really happened in the story instead. Think about it for a second. Okay, go ahead, turn and talk. All right, good job, everybody. You're smart first graders. I heard a lot of predictions